Ethan Williams stood alone on the Green River Bridge, the quiet rumble of the river below mingling with the occasional gust of wind. The steel of the bridge creaked in protest, the world beyond blurred by the faint mist of an impending storm. His expensive gray suit, tailored perfectly to his broad frame, billowed slightly in the breeze, but it did little to mask the unease he felt deep inside. He hadn't intended to come here, not today, but sometimes decisions weren't made by the mind. They came from the part of him that had been shutting down for years, fighting with guilt, stress, and a need to control everything. Beside him stood his daughter, Lily, her small hand loosely holding onto his. She was only 6, but her mind was different from other children's. Her gaze was fixed on the river, but not in a way that seemed casual. It was as if she was analyzing the flow, understanding the way the water moved, the shapes it made. She wore a pink dress, her long brown hair tangled from the wind, and her eyes, the large, thoughtful brown eyes that always seemed to study the world, were locked onto the rushing current, unblinking. Lily had a condition, something neither Ethan nor anyone else fully understood. She saw patterns in everything, the way the clouds drifted across the sky, the way the leaves fell, the way people spoke. It was unsettling at times. But the worst part of it was that Lily's honesty had cost Ethan his most important business deal to date. In front of a room full of corporate investors, her innocent comment about the miscalculation in the financial report had shattered his carefully constructed facade. The deal was lost. The contracts were canceled. And all of his hard work, years of building his empire, came crashing down. "Daddy, I don't like it here," Lily said softly, her voice trembling as she tugged at his suit jacket. "It feels wrong." Ethan's grip tightened slightly on her hand. "We'll be leaving soon," he said, his voice cold, distant. His mind was elsewhere, consumed by the weight of his responsibilities, the crushing pressure of his career, and the impossible decisions that had to be made. There was no room for distractions, no room for emotions, not with everything at stake. "You said that last time," Lily murmured, her words barely audible over the rushing water. "You said we'd leave, but you didn't." The words hit him like a slap in the face, though he did nothing to show it. His daughter's perceptiveness, the way she could see through the facade of his composed exterior, was both a blessing and a curse. Lily wasn't like other children. She had an ability to cut through the pretense, the lies. It was part of why she was such a burden to him. It wasn't that he didn't love her. Ethan had once loved her with all his heart, the same way he loved his late wife, Marina. But life, with all its pressure and demands, had worn him down. And as the weight of his failures grew, he began to resent the very thing that had once been his greatest joy, his daughter. Lily tugged at his sleeve again, her face upturned, her voice quivering. "Daddy, please, don't go. Don't make me stay here. It's too big, too cold." Ethan looked at his daughter, his heart sinking. But his mind, clouded with stress, pushed any feeling of guilt aside. He had to do what was best for himself, for his future. He had no choice. His career, his reputation, it all depended on getting rid of distractions. "You're just like your mother," he muttered under his breath, almost as if he were speaking to himself. Pure, innocent, and unable to understand how the world works. Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. She was silent, clinging to him as if she could feel the coldness in his touch. Ethan glanced at her, his patience wearing thin. He had done everything for her, for both of them. But in that moment, it felt like she had taken more than he could give. And it wasn't just about the failed business deal. It was the way her presence, Her unique mind disrupted everything he had worked so hard to build. "Please, Lily, stop," he said harshly, his voice cracking. But it wasn't out of tenderness, it was frustration, the weight of his own failures pressing down on him. Lily pulled away from him, her small hand slipping from his grip as she stepped back, her face now a mask of confusion and hurt. The wind had picked up, howling through the bridge, and she looked at him with those wide eyes, a mixture of innocence and fear. "I'm sorry," Ethan whispered, though it felt hollow in his mouth. "But you've got to stop making everything so complicated. I can't do this anymore." In a swift motion, Ethan lifted her by the arm, his grip firm and decisive, as he whispered in her ear, "You ruined everything. Now you'll never get in my way again." Lily's eyes widened in disbelief, her little hands grabbing at his, trying to free herself. Her small body trembled as she pleaded, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, Daddy, don't." But before she could say more, something caught Ethan's eye, a flash of white movement. He turned just in time to see it. A majestic white horse, its powerful body moving quickly toward them. The horse, with a gleam of intelligence in its eyes, had been grazing nearby, but now it was charging toward the bridge, moving faster than Ethan could comprehend. Ethan froze, his grip on Lily slackening for just a moment, as the horse leapt gracefully over the bridge's railing. It was as if time slowed down. In an act of impossible speed and instinct, the horse plunged into the water, its body cutting through the air like a living missile. The sound of hooves was replaced by the splash of water, and in a heartbeat the horse was gone. Lily screamed in panic as the current of the river caught her small body, pulling her toward the churning depths below. But before she could be dragged under, the white horse emerged from the murky water, its strong muscular body cutting through the waves as it swam toward her. Ethan stood frozen, unable to process what he was seeing. His mind, clouded with guilt and disbelief, couldn't react quickly enough. The horse's hooves made contact with Lily's fragile frame, its strong, warm body offering her the protection Ethan had failed to provide. The horse's eyes, clear and calm, met Lily's for just a moment. It was a strange connection, something that went beyond instinct. As Lily grabbed onto the horse's mane, the animal guided her toward the shore, pushing through the current with strength and grace. When they reached the riverbank, Lily's body was trembling, her small chest heaving in shock and fear. The horse nudged her gently with its muzzle, as if to comfort her, and Lily instinctively hugged its neck, drawing warmth and solace from its presence. Ethan, standing on the bridge, watched the entire scene unfold in a numbed silence. His body remained still, paralyzed with horror, guilt, and disbelief. He had just tried to destroy his daughter's life, but it was a horse, not him, that had saved her. In the distance, the sound of sirens began to fill the air. Emergency vehicles would soon arrive, but Ethan didn't move. He stayed frozen in place, watching his daughter clinging to the animal that had done what he could not. He had been ready to take everything from her, and in the blink of an eye, it was taken from him. The horse, now resting on the riverbank, watched Ethan briefly, before turning its attention back to Lily. Ethan, for the first time in years, felt something deep inside, a sense of loss and regret so profound it seemed to reach down to his very soul. As the sirens grew louder, he took one last look at Lily, now safe, her hand gently stroking the horse's coat. And in that moment, the weight of everything he had done and everything he had lost became unbearable. Lily's small fingers gripped the white horse's mane as she sat atop its broad back, the water still dripping from her wet clothes. But the cold had already begun to subside. The storm, though not yet fully gone, had lifted for a moment, and the sun's rays broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the riverbank. Her mind, typically so full of patterns and numbers, was clouded with confusion and fear. But Apollo, the horse that had saved her, seemed to understand. She felt his warmth as he moved under her, strong and steady, like the quiet pulse of life itself. His coat, gleaming white even when soaked, shimmered in the fading sunlight. Apollo was more than just a horse. He was a protector, a guardian, a silent companion in the whirlwind of her young life. Lily's gaze remained fixed on the creature before her. She studied his every move, his every muscle, as if the pattern of his being was something she could decipher and understand. The world had always seemed chaotic to Lily, full of disjointed moments that only she seemed to notice. But in the presence of Apollo, there was an order, a pattern, she hadn't yet seen, but somehow felt was there. "Are you real?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath against the wind. The horse nickered softly, as if in response. For a moment, Lily could almost swear she saw something in his eyes, a wisdom that went beyond mere instinct. She hugged his neck a little tighter. "Thank you," she whispered again, though the words felt inadequate for the miracle that had just unfolded. Lily had no idea how much time passed before an elderly woman approached them. She had been watching from a distance, her frail form barely visible against the backdrop of the riverbank. The woman's gray hair was pulled back in a simple knot, and her wide-brimmed hat shielded her face from the sun's rays. She walked slowly, using a weathered cane for support, but her steps were deliberate, as if she had long been used to moving with purpose. "Quite the bond you've made with him," the woman called out, her voice gentle but firm. Lily turned her head slowly. The woman's voice, though warm, carried the weight of someone who had lived many years, someone who had seen a great deal of life. The woman stopped a few feet away, her tired eyes assessing the situation with an uncanny sharpness. "Are you all right, child?" she asked, her gaze lingering on Lily's trembling hands, which were still wrapped tightly around Apollo's mane. Lily nodded, though she wasn't sure if the nod was for the woman or for herself. Her head was still spinning, trying to piece together what had just happened. One minute she had been on the bridge with her father, and the next she was here, saved by a horse she had never seen before. "I'm fine," she said quietly, though the words felt empty. Her voice was strained from the shock, the fear still tangled in her chest. She blinked hard, trying to focus on the woman standing before her. "My name's Caroline," the woman continued, her voice softer now. "And this here's Apollo." She gestured to the horse. "Seems like you two have already met. He's a good one. Been with me a long time." Lily swallowed, looking at the woman more closely. Caroline's face was weathered, with lines that spoke of years spent working outdoors, but her eyes were kind. She didn't look at Lily with pity or fear, something that made Lily feel a little more at ease. I don't understand," Lily said, her voice quiet, unsure. I was supposed to—" The words caught in her throat, and she shook her head, not knowing how to finish. She wanted to say that her father had tried to hurt her, but the thought was too much to bear. Instead, she just hugged Apollo again, pressing her face into his soft coat. Caroline's eyes softened as she observed the child, but she didn't ask any more questions. She simply waited for Lily to speak when she was ready. After a moment, Lily pulled away from Apollo, wiping her tear-streaked face. She looked up at Caroline, who was still standing there, patiently watching her. "Why did he save me?" Lily asked, her voice small. "The horse, Apollo. Why did he do that?" Caroline chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Some things don't need a reason. You were in trouble and he knew it. Horses have an instinct, you know. He sensed something in you, something I've seen in him before. He's always been the one to protect, to guide. Maybe that's why you two found each other." Lily, still unsure of what was happening, just nodded slowly. She wanted to believe the woman, wanted to believe that there was more to the world than the cold, calculating world her father had built around her. The world that had pushed her away made her feel like a burden instead of a blessing. Caroline studied her for a moment, her eyes searching Lily's face for something. She then turned her attention to the horse, who stood patiently beside them, seemingly content to allow the child to take comfort in his presence. "Come on," Caroline said after a beat. "You look like you could use a place to sit. Let's get you to my farm. I've got some dry clothes and something warm to drink." Lily hesitated, looking back toward the river. For a brief moment, she wondered if she should go back, if her father would come for her. But then she looked at Apollo again, his gentle, intelligent eyes, and she knew that she wasn't alone anymore. She had found something different, something real. And maybe, just maybe, she could find peace here. Caroline led Lily toward the dirt road that wound its way to her small farm, her hand gently resting on the child's shoulder. They walked in silence, the sound of Apollo's hooves echoing softly behind them. Caroline didn't speak, but Lily could feel the warmth of her presence, something steady and sure that made her feel a little less lost. When they reached the farmhouse, Caroline led them inside. The cozy home was filled with the scent of fresh hay and wood, a peacefulness that was worlds away from the chaotic world Lily had just left behind. Caroline moved to the small kitchen, taking down a warm mug and filling it with tea. Lily sat at the table, still silent, as she sipped the warmth, the steam rising in the air. The house felt different from anywhere she had been, and for the first time in a long while, she felt something she couldn't quite name, a sense of safety. After a few moments, Caroline sat down across from her. "You're not from around here, are you?" she asked gently. "I can tell you're not used to this kind of life. But you've got a special gift, Lily. I can see it. Apollo can see it too." Lily looked up at Caroline, her eyes still uncertain but curious. "What do you mean?" she asked quietly. Caroline smiled softly, her wrinkled hands gently clasped in front of her. "You see patterns, don't you? The way things connect. The way the world works in its own way, even when people don't understand it. That's a gift, Lily, a gift that not everyone has. But with that gift comes a responsibility, to use it for something good." Lily nodded slowly, unsure of what Caroline was asking, but feeling something stir inside her, something she couldn't quite explain. Apollo, who had been resting by the door, stood up, moving closer to her and nudging her hand gently. Lily smiled, feeling the warmth of the horse's presence once more. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't alone, like maybe she didn't have to fight everything and everyone. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a place where she belonged. Ethan Williams had always been a man of control, a man who understood the numbers, the spreadsheets, the cold, hard reality of the business world. For years, he had built an empire, his empire, and for just as many years he had kept his personal life, his emotions, his mistakes locked away in a vault of secrets. But now, that vault was starting to crack. The weight of the guilt he felt was like a physical burden pressing down on his chest, squeezing the air from his lungs. Sitting in his plush office on the 40th floor of his corporate building in New York, Ethan stared out at the skyline, the city that had always been his kingdom. The glass walls of his office reflected the bright, bustling world outside, but inside he felt only emptiness. The quiet hum of the air conditioning did little to drown out the storm raging inside his mind. The image of Lily, his own daughter, flashed before him. Her tear-streaked face, her small, trembling form as he had held her over the edge of that bridge, whispering cruel words that he could never take back. The sound of her voice, desperate, pleading for him to stop, still echoed in his ears. "Daddy, please." He closed his eyes, shaking his head as if to shake away the haunting memories. His hands, once steady and sure, were now trembling as he ran them over his face. He had tried to bury the guilt, tried to forget about the little girl he had once promised to protect. But it had all come crashing down, the walls he had built around himself crumbling, bit by bit. And now he couldn't escape the truth. Ethan knew what he had done. He knew that no amount of wealth or status could erase the damage he had caused. And yet, despite everything, he felt a strange, growing fear. Fear not of losing his empire, but of losing his daughter forever. It was a fear that gripped him tighter than any business deal ever had. A fear that paralyzed him, turning his every step into an agonizing calculation. For weeks, he had avoided Caroline Jenkins' calls. She had been the one to find Lily, to save her, to give her shelter after the incident. But Ethan couldn't bring himself to face her. He couldn't bring himself to look into the eyes of someone who had seen him for what he truly was. A man who was willing to throw his own daughter away for the sake of his own pride. But it wasn't just the guilt eating away at him. Ethan's empire, his financial fortress, was crumbling. The numbers weren't adding up anymore. He had tried to push them aside, tried to focus on the bigger picture, but every decision he made only seemed to make things worse. The client who had backed out of their deal, the lost contracts, the investors who had started to whisper behind his back, he could feel it all slipping through his fingers. It was Lily's voice, the one that had interrupted his presentation so many months ago, that still haunted him. "Daddy, the numbers are wrong." Her voice had been so innocent, so pure, but it had been the one thing that had cost him everything. The one thing that had shattered his world. Her extraordinary ability to see the truth, something he had never truly valued, had been the catalyst for his downfall. He could feel the weight of her honesty pressing on him, like an unspoken accusation. She had been right all along, but he had dismissed her, ignored her, thinking she was just a child with an overactive imagination. Now, the truth was coming for him. He could feel it. Ethan looked down at his desk, at the piles of financial reports, the endless spreadsheets that had once been his lifeblood. He had built his entire career on these numbers, on manipulating them, on bending them to his will. But now the numbers were turning against him. They were unraveling everything he had worked so hard to build. He had been so focused on the money, on the power, that he had failed to see the one thing that truly mattered, his daughter. He stood up suddenly, pushing his chair back with force. The movement was sharp, uncoordinated, as if his body had finally rebelled against the chaos inside his mind. He walked to the window, his gaze falling on the sprawling city below, but his thoughts were far from the view. He thought about Lily, his daughter, the one person he had failed. And then a thought struck him. A terrifying, damning thought. If Lily knew the truth, if she understood what was really going on in his company, she could destroy him. She could expose him for what he was. She had already seen the lies, the manipulations, the financial fraud that had been buried beneath the polished surface of his empire. He could feel the walls closing in around him. There was only one way to stop her, one way to silence her for good. But deep down, he knew it wasn't the solution. The guilt weighed heavier, pressing down on him with each passing minute. He had been wrong. He had to make it right somehow. The question was how. Meanwhile, across town, Caroline Jenkins stood at the edge of her farm, looking out over the rolling hills. The sun was setting behind the distant trees, casting long shadows across the land. Apollo, the white horse that had saved Lily, stood grazing nearby, his coat still damp from the river but glistening in the fading light. Caroline had seen many things in her life: horses that had been mistreated, children who had suffered in silence, and families torn apart by secrets. But there was something different about Lily, something she couldn't quite put into words, but that she had felt from the moment she first laid eyes on the child. There was a quiet strength in Lily, a wisdom that went beyond her years. It was a wisdom that Caroline had seen before, in the eyes of the horses she had trained, in the way they communicated without words. And it was that same wisdom that had led her to make the decision to contact Ethan. Caroline wasn't naive. She knew what kind of man Ethan Williams was: powerful, ruthless, driven by ambition. But she also knew that there was more to him than the cold businessman he had become. She had seen the cracks in his armor, the guilt that he carried with him, and she knew that, if given the chance, he might be able to redeem himself. But he had to want it. He had to be ready to face the truth. Caroline shook her head, her hand resting on the wooden fence post as she sighed deeply. She knew it wouldn't be easy, it never was. But Lily deserved to know the truth. She deserved to have a father who saw her for who she really was, not just as a burden, but as a gift. The distant sound of a car engine broke Caroline's thoughts, and she turned her gaze toward the road. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the familiar shape of a car approaching. It was Ethan. The day was quiet on the farm, an unsettling calm that hung in the air like a heavy fog. Caroline stood at the kitchen window, watching the horses graze in the fields. She was lost in thought, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea that did little to comfort her. She had made the decision to confront Ethan, to face the man who had once been her friend and now stood as the obstacle between Lily and the truth. Ethan had arrived early that morning, his dark sedan parked at the end of the dirt driveway. His expression was unreadable as he stepped out of the car, his expensive suit a sharp contrast to the rustic farm that surrounded him. His eyes, once filled with ambition and pride, now looked empty, haunted by something Caroline couldn't quite place. She watched him for a long moment, her breath catching as she tried to reconcile the man before her with the memory of the father Lily had once loved. "This is a mistake," Ethan muttered to himself, pacing in front of the house. He had no idea what he was walking into, but he knew one thing for sure: he was terrified. Caroline's footsteps were soft but deliberate as she crossed the room, setting her tea down on the wooden table. She took one last look out the window before making her way to the door. The wind had started to pick up, rustling the trees and bending the tall grass in the fields. The air smelled like rain, but the storm wasn't just coming from the sky, it was coming from the confrontation that loomed before them. Ethan's jaw clenched as he stood outside Caroline's front door, his heart beating louder than it ever had in a business meeting. He had been to boardrooms and grand offices, had shaken hands with billionaires, and had signed deals that had changed the landscape of industries. But this was different. This was his daughter's future, and that was something he couldn't control with spreadsheets or power plays. He had tried to bury the truth. He had buried the guilt, buried the remorse. But the more he tried to push it down, the harder it fought to break through. And Lily, she had seen it all. She knew too much, and it terrified him. He hadn't come here to admit his wrongs, not yet. He was here to fix it, to find a way to make the past disappear. The door opened, and there she stood, Caroline Jenkins, calm as always, but there was a fire in her eyes, one that Ethan hadn't seen in years. He forced a tight smile, his eyes scanning her face for any hint of what was coming. "Caroline," Ethan said, his voice steady but tight, "I need to talk to you about Lily. Caroline didn't smile. She didn't invite him in. Instead, she simply stepped aside and motioned for him to follow her. Inside, the tension was thick. The large wooden beams in the ceiling cast long shadows over the room, making the space feel both intimate and suffocating at the same time. Ethan's gaze flicked over the room, landing on Lily's drawings scattered across the table, a chaotic yet somehow beautiful display of her extraordinary mind. "Lily," he said, his voice a mix of regret and confusion. She was sitting on the floor, her back to them, flipping through one of her notebooks. Her red curls were wild, and she hummed quietly to herself, seemingly unaware of her father's presence. Caroline didn't waste time. "She knows, Ethan," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "She knows everything." Ethan's breath caught in his throat, and for a moment the words didn't seem real. How could she know everything? Lily was just a child. How could she possibly understand the magnitude of what had happened? "She's been watching you," Caroline continued, her gaze never leaving him. "She sees the patterns in everything, in people, in the world around her. You can't hide from her, not anymore." Ethan turned sharply, his mind racing. "What are you talking about? She's just a kid. She doesn't understand the world the way I do." Caroline took a deep breath, her eyes softening. "Lily understands more than you think. And so do you, Ethan. You've always known what you were doing. You've always known the truth, even when you tried to bury it." Ethan felt a cold shiver run down his spine as the weight of her words sank in. He opened his mouth to protest, but Caroline held up her hand. "Lily," she said, her voice gentler now. "Lily is the one who can set you free, but only if you stop running from the truth." He didn't know what to say. How could he? How could he look his daughter in the eye and admit that he had tried to throw her away? He had wanted to do it, but now the guilt, the weight of what he had almost done, was too much to bear. Lily had stopped flipping through her notebook. She was watching him now, her eyes fixed on his, and Ethan felt his stomach twist with fear. There was no denying it. She could see it all, the lies, the manipulation, the fraud, and she wasn't afraid to speak the truth. Lily stood up slowly, her small frame steady as she walked toward her father. She didn't speak at first. Instead, she reached for one of her notebooks, holding it up to him. It was filled with complex equations, patterns, numbers, an organized chaos that only she could understand. Ethan took the notebook from her hands, staring at the pages. His heart skipped a beat when he saw what Lily had written. "This is the truth," Lily said softly. "This is the pattern." Her voice was calm, almost too calm, and Ethan felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. She had seen it all, the financial fraud, the deals he had made, the lies that had kept him at the top. She had been watching him all along, tracking the patterns, the inconsistencies. I didn't mean for any of this to happen," Ethan stammered, his mind spinning. "Lily, I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" Lily's voice was quiet but firm. "You were trying to protect yourself." The words hit him harder than anything he had ever heard. She was right. He had tried to protect himself, and in doing so he had almost lost everything that mattered. The silence in the room was deafening. Ethan stood there, his heart racing as he tried to process the reality of the situation. Caroline was right. Lily had seen the truth long before he had ever been willing to admit it. "Lily," Ethan said, his voice breaking, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Lily's gaze softened, but her eyes remained sharp. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she stepped closer to him, placing her small hand on his. Her fingers were warm, steady, a stark contrast to the coldness he felt inside. "It's okay, Daddy," she whispered. "I'm not mad at you. But you have to fix it. You have to make it right." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat, his chest tight with emotion. For the first time in years, he felt like he had a chance. Maybe not to fix everything, but to make things right with the one person who mattered most. "Lily," he said, his voice cracking. "I'll do whatever it takes." She smiled then, a small, fragile smile that reminded him of everything he had almost lost. It was a smile that carried no judgment, no anger, just a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to rebuild what he had broken. The days that followed the confrontation between Ethan, Caroline, and Lily were filled with silence, but it wasn't the quiet that weighed heavily in the air. No, it was a silence of change, a silence that held the promise of something different, something better. Ethan hadn't known what it meant to change. He had lived a life of calculated decisions, of building walls to protect himself from the consequences of his actions. But now, with everything on the line, he couldn't keep running anymore. Caroline had asked him to leave the city behind, to step away from his empire, his kingdom of glass towers and financial power. It wasn't an easy decision. Ethan had fought the idea of leaving it all behind, his grip on his business his one true source of identity. But when Lily had placed her hand on his, when she had spoken to him with a clarity that shook him to his core, he had seen the truth. He had seen everything he had been blind to all those years. That evening, as he sat on the porch of the farmhouse, his hands trembling around a cup of coffee, the weight of everything he had almost lost finally began to sink in. He had almost lost his daughter. He had almost thrown her away because of his own selfishness, his own fear. But now she was the one thing that mattered most. Lily was sitting in the barn, as she often did now, her small frame nestled against the soft hay bales. Apollo, the white horse who had saved her life, stood next to her, his warm body providing comfort as he nuzzled her gently. The connection between the two of them had only deepened since the day of the rescue. It was as though the horse understood Lily's every need, every unspoken thought. Caroline stood outside the barn, watching the scene. She had seen the way Lily interacted with Apollo, the way the horse seemed to intuitively know what Lily needed, when she needed it. It wasn't just a bond, it was a language all their own. Caroline had always known horses to be sensitive creatures, but the way Apollo and Lily communicated was something beyond anything she had ever witnessed. She had spent years training horses, observing their behavior, learning their quirks and patterns. But it was Lily who had shown her a new way of seeing the world, of understanding the unspoken things that went beyond words. The breeze picked up, the soft rustling of the trees carrying with it a hint of rain. Caroline knew the storm was coming, not just the one in the sky, but the one that had been building in Ethan. The day of reckoning was near, and she could feel it in her bones. Ethan had promised that he would change, but Caroline knew promises were easy to make. It was the action that would speak louder than words. "Lily," Ethan's voice was soft as he stepped into the barn. He had come out here more often now, trying to be present in her life, to be the father she needed him to be. But even as he stood there, watching her with Apollo, he didn't know if he was enough. Lily looked up at him, her deep brown eyes meeting his. She didn't smile, but there was something in her gaze. Something that reminded him of how far he had fallen, but also how far he had come. "Daddy," she said, her voice steady. "You look sad." Ethan's heart clenched. She could always see through him. "I am, Lily," he admitted. "I'm sorry for everything I've done, for all the mistakes I've made. I know I can't change the past, but I want to do better, for you, for us." Lily nodded, her small hand reaching out to touch his. You can do better, she said simply, as if the answer was obvious to her. But you have to fix the numbers. You have to make them right. Ethan chuckled softly, though there was no humor in it. Lily's view of the world, her understanding of patterns, was as much a curse as it was a blessing. It was a blessing because it showed him the way forward, how to right the wrongs he had done. But it was also a curse because it reminded him of just how far he had fallen. "I will, Lily," he said, his voice firm now. "I'm going to fix everything, and it starts with me. I'm leaving my company behind. I'm going to use what's left to do something good." Lily's eyes softened, and she nodded, as though she had always known this was the path he would choose. It was like she had already calculated it, knew the outcome, long before Ethan had even begun to understand it. Caroline watched them from the door of the barn, her heart heavy with emotion. She had seen the transformation in Ethan, and though she wasn't sure he was ready to give up everything, she believed him. She had seen the way he had looked at Lily, the way his eyes had softened when he realized how much he had hurt her. She walked towards them, her slow, steady footsteps almost lost in the sound of the wind. "Ethan," she said, her voice breaking the silence between them, "you can't undo the past, but you can make the future different, and that starts with you." Ethan nodded, his gaze shifting from Caroline to Lily. "I know," he said softly. "I've spent too long running away from what really matters. It's time to stop." Caroline smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. "You've still got a long way to go, Ethan. But I believe you can get there. I believe you can find redemption." For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. He had spent his life chasing success, but now, standing here on this farm, watching his daughter with the horse that had saved her life, he realized that true success wasn't about money or power. It was about love, and it was about doing right by the people who mattered most. Later that day, Ethan made his phone call, the one he had been dreading for so long. He picked up the phone, his hands shaking as he dialed the number he had been avoiding for weeks. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Finally, someone answered. "Hello?" It was Helena. Ethan's throat tightened. "Helena," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It's over." That night, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with Caroline and Lily, the 3 of them sharing a simple meal of bread and soup. There was no fanfare, no grand gesture, just quiet, steady work, the work of rebuilding. Ethan knew it wouldn't be easy. He knew that there would be days when the weight of his actions would threaten to drag him under. But he also knew that he wasn't alone anymore, and that, more than anything, was what mattered. Lily smiled at him across the table, her hand resting gently on Apollo's mane, who had come into the house to keep her company. "We're fixing the numbers, Daddy," she said softly, her eyes full of certainty. "We're making it right." Ethan looked at his daughter, his heart swelling with pride. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be.